Who knew an announcement trailer packed so much info? Here to dive even deeper on the gameplay of HYENAS is Design Director Alex Breault. Alex, thank you so much for bringing the trailer today. How are you doing?
Good. You?
I am doing very, very good. I'm very excited to talk about HYENAS, and the trailer makes it look pretty fast-paced. Would you agree with that? And if so, how are you thinking about time to kill, weapon feel, all that good stuff in gameplay design?
So first, yes, as you're saying, HYENAS is really a fast-paced game, and we really built our game to make sure that it was making the most out of that fast-paced, movement-based combat. A lot of what we are doing in terms of combat is, to a certain extent, calling back to a more arcade shooter feel, but obviously with a much more modern take on it. So it's all about movement, about that fast action, and really trading action for the player. When you're talking about the time to kill and the TTK, we needed to make sure that we had the right one and a relatively long one to make sure that it was giving space for the player to be able to express themselves during the fight. If you take that a bit in perspective, like if we would have had a shorter time to kill, the focus would have been much more about the anticipation leading to that point of contact. What we wanted in HYENAS was to make sure that once you're in contact with the enemies, you have room and time to be able to change the situation, use the abilities of your characters, and on top of that, we have so many things. So there's enemies, NPCs, the security guards, multiple teams. So that gives time for the player to react, change the situation, and adapt, and make the most out of it. For example, making sure that they are using their ability to distract the NPCs, attract them more on the other players to be able to get that moment, locking themselves out of that room to be able to heal back, prepare themselves, and go back in the fight. So that time is to give the player themselves the time to be able to express themselves and make the most out of the feature. And obviously that's something that we'll continue balancing on, and that's one of the reasons why we're going to an early close alpha, to make sure that the player have their input in that and is in that journey with us to make sure that we have the best balance out of the combat.
So it does sound like there's an escape element or an evasion element, along with various security systems in the game that we've heard about previously. Are there stealth components to HYENAS though?
Yes, in terms of how it works with the PvE side and with the security guards, there's a lot of options about how the player can approach that. But we didn't want to make that just about traditional stealth. It's not about crawling behind crates slowly or hiding in a corner waiting for patrol guards for a guard to finish his patrol. It's much more about, again, movement and fast pace, and it goes in terms of choice for the player around our three gameplay pillars. Engage, which is going on gun blazing, taking the enemy head on. Evade, which is all about movement. Again, it's about that fast-paced movement. So when you're evading against the NPC and the guard challenge and the security challenge, it's much more about how you use that movement to be able to reach your objective, evading the direct confrontation. So to give an example of that, it could be using zero gravity to reach a vent that is otherwise inaccessible, and then going to that vent through fast movement, sliding out under detectors, jumping over threat to get to the vault without being detected. The last gameplay pillar, which is exploit, is all about you manipulate your systems or manipulate the security system, the security guards, or the other players to your own advantage, distracting them, or I've talked about gravity, for example, switching gravity to change the setup in which you are, or using some of the other systems to your advantage.
Alex, I have to ask, how big are the maps here? It's a 15-player game, which would seem to not quite require a full Battle Royale size map, but at the same time, the trailer gives off a vibe that there's going to be a lot going on in each round. Would you say that the maps are bigger than traditional deathmatch maps, but smaller than Battle Royale maps?
Yeah, that's pretty much right. The size of the map is in between those. We needed to make sure that we have enough space for the main elements that we needed for the game. So there's some space that is needed to have each of the PvE challenge with the security areas around them. We also needed to have enough space to have the 5 teams and some room for them to be able to play so that they're not all pushed together from the beginning of the game. That means that it's larger map than a deathmatch map, but it doesn't need to be as large as a Battle Royale map because that is with much more players. The biggest difference, however, is not about the size, but the type of map it is. Most Battle Royale maps are open and much more open. The game is taking place on spaceship, so that pushed us to have really different space to be able to support the gameplay and give different opportunity and different play space for the players. There's larger structure like service core where you'll be able to move in zero gravity. There's some closer area around rooms, corridors where you'll find more of the security guards and the security system protecting the merge and the vault, and some hubs in the middle that you can choose where you want to go out of there. So it creates a lot of variety within each of those spaceships, but from one spaceship to the other, we'll make sure that we have a different feel and different composition in terms of gameplay.
You actually brought up zero-G, and I'm really curious, mechanically, how is zero-G going to work in this space?
Zero gravity is really one of the elements that we wanted to push to get that right space feel within HYENAS. And more than that, we wanted to make sure that we were approaching it in a way that is true to our game, fast-paced, about movement and trading. And on top of that, we needed to make sure, and sorry for the bad pun, that it was easy to jump in for new players. So the way the zero gravity is working for in HYENAS is that it's a point-to-point system. Basically, you start from one surface and you'll be able to push yourself and jump toward another surface. And while you're making that flight, you have limited air control. So it's really about that still fast movement, it's trading, and it goes back to that idea that being in zero gravity, it's not slowly floating in space, it's falling in every direction, and you're using that to move quickly through the space. Where it gets really interesting, obviously, is when you get in combat in that, you will have those kind of dogfighting moments against other player in the zero gravity space. And that's why we have other elements for the player to have finer control, to be able to sometimes change their direction, or using your Mac boot to go back to the floor and propulse yourself again.
So how have you balanced the zero-G map space to make sure that there are spaces on and above ground for players to explore, and how do you handle combat within that space?
So in terms of how we integrated zero gravity within the map, we really made that from the beginning, making sure that it's well integrated. We have overall two types of space regarding gravity within our ships. Some of those are always meant to be in zero gravity. There's never artificial gravity in there. They are, for example, the service core, the large structure that is holding the ship together, where you'll find some engineering stuff, or larger cargo space that doesn't need to have gravity in there. And those are really interesting because they are, for the player, because they are more open, you can fully use the speed that you can get out of zero-G. And then those are really built to have those 360 combat, more akin dogfight in larger open space for the player that you can do against the other player. The other space in the ship have, by default, usually artificial gravity, but the player has the opportunity to be able to turn it off and use what it happened, and use that as a way to change the situation for him in that zero gravity space that they just created. It could be against the NPC and the security guard that are being caught off guard, start floating in the air, that you can take them off while they're vulnerable or push them away. Or it could also be against other players, and that's where we build those spaces are interesting, because there's some of the elements that will only be accessible if you're using zero-G to get there. So you can use that to try to take the advantage and the high ground against the other player and then turn off gravity. Or they can, on their side, turn gravity off, be able to suddenly close a gap against other player and use, for example, if they have shorter range weapon, close that gap against you and suddenly turn the table on you. So it's those moments that change the flow of combat and flow of gameplay that are really interesting to it.
You also brought up AI and NPCs that you're going to be fighting against. How is that going to work? Is it going to be mandatory to engage with them during each match, or is it something that can be snuck past or avoided?
So the security guards and the security system are really core to the game, and player will need to interact with them in some way, because they are there and they are guarding the merge, which is the main objective for the player and the way for you to be able to win a match. Having said that, there's a lot of ways that you can interact with them, so it's not necessarily going heads-on against them and fighting them. You have, as we were saying before, engage option, evade option, and exploit option. So you don't need to always go directly against them. You can try to use an evasion route to be able to go around some of the NPC and security guard threats. Having said that, the NPCs are not the only thing, and the PvE side is not the only thing. You need to take care about the other players and figure out how you will deal with them. That same way that you can decide to engage them, evade them, or try to exploit them. And that's where it's really interesting for the player, that they need to balance the PvE, the security system, the security guards, and the other teams of HYENAS that are there competing for them against the same goal. And a good player in HYENAS will be able to take that to their own advantage, seeing how they manage with the PvE and the PvP, manipulating both of them, playing them each against each other to get the most out of the situation and find a way through that to win the game.
Is there any sort of a gun tier system so I know that I have the best gun possible? Or what kind of weapons are available to players?
So we want to make sure that we are covering a good variety in terms of weapon from the start, and we'll be growing that over time, obviously. So we start and we have all the staples that you expect in terms of shotgun, assault rifle, SMG, rifle, and some sidearms that you can pick from. The way that the weapons are working is that when you pick your hyena, it comes with a main primary weapon and also an ability, and that is really making the core of the gameplay from the hyena, from the character that you picked. Aside from that, you can then pick a specific sidearm that would complement it. So you're starting from that kit when you start your match, but that doesn't stop there, because through the game you can gain some power and make your equipment better. You can find some weapon buff and some gadget that you can then use to be able to take a more difficult challenge toward the end or compete with the other player that will still be there trying to get the merch out of you.
Speaking of interesting weapons, what was the weird white bubbly goop weapon shown in the trailer? And what other weird weapons are there that are going to be introduced in this world?
So that one is the foam gun. It's the primary ability from the Commander Right, one of our characters. So it's a really good example of where we want to take some of those abilities in HYENAS. It's giving a lot of options for the player and allow them to be creative in the way that they will be using them in the match. So if you're thinking about the foam gun, the first simpler use that you can get is that you can use it to foam some of the security guard. They will be stuck in it, and then you can finish them while they're vulnerable, or just get away from them during that time while they're dealing with the foam on them. But you can also use that to change the combat, change the situation. You can create cover with it. You could decide when you're engaging against other players that you need some time, retreat behind the door, foam the door, and then they will get more time to be able to, so that gives you time to get other different strategy during that time. It can also be helpful for evading or reaching hard place. So you can create platform with it, you can jump on it and be able to reach other area that otherwise is not accessible unless if you use zero gravity. But sometimes switching the whole gravity state of an area is not the thing that the player will want to do, because it reveals their presence to all the other players that are in the same area. So using the foam gun is a more subtle way to be able to achieve that. So that's really our philosophy in HYENAS for the abilities, and we want to make sure that each of the ability we bring will create those opportunities in terms of creativity and expression for the player.
How long are matches in HYENAS? Do they feel like they go by really fast?
So the maximum duration of a match is 20 minutes, but that's the max. The average is more around 10-12 minutes, and it will obviously depend. If it's a closely contested match, it can run longer than that. If it's really dominated by one of the team, it can end sooner also. But it's not just about the duration. I think it's interesting for us to think about what is the flow and what is the progress from that match. In your early match, it's really about getting preparation, getting the first few items and supply in terms of power progression, leading towards your first objective, trying to get to your first vault. There is sometimes some PvP skirmish, but it's not full on during that time. After that, when we get more in the mid-match, around the 5-minute marks, that's usually the time where a couple of the vaults have been raided, some of the team has merch on them, and then the PvP is really getting more intense because players are getting close from getting the quota to do the getaway. So either players are converging on the last remaining votes that act as a PvP magnet, or you start chasing the other team to try to steal the merch that they got already. And then once one of the team managed to hit the quota, it's when things kick up a notch even more. It's a frantic race for them to get to their getaway, try to secure the loot that they have, and the other teams are trying to stop them while the ship is putting up its last defense in terms of security guards, security system, trying to prevent the HYENAS from extracting the loot.
Well, hopefully every once in a while I can win a match. This sounds really, really interesting. Thank you so much for joining us, Alex.
Huge shout out to our partners at SEGA and Creative Assembly. HYENAS is coming to Xbox Series consoles, Xbox One and One X, PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4, and PC sometime in 2023. Visit playhyenas.com to find out even more about the game and to sign up for the alpha. And of course, stay tuned to IGN.